Welcome to the Resilient Performance Podcast. This is Keep It Real number 26. We're going to talk about physical therapy school and some things that are just coming up on social media these days. Doug, you want to start it off?
Yeah, it's just kind of about clinical education in general. I often see these posts on social media, these tweets where people will say like, physical therapy, and you could say physical therapy school, medical school. It's basically all the extra things that they should teach that they don't. So in the case of physical therapy, it's, if only physical therapy schools taught business education, taught more about strength and conditioning, high level performance. And yeah, I mean, if time wasn't finite and there wasn't, like a restricted amount of time that it takes to get a degree, it would be great if formal, programs taught these things. But I think that attitude or that idea suggests that like the only place that we can actually receive an education is from a formally credentialed program or from a university. And I take the opposite stance. I think that if you want to learn something like business or strength and conditioning as a physical therapist, you can get that information elsewhere. If they were to put those types of disciplines into a formal program, it would make the formal programs longer. And chances are the formal programs would do it for a much higher price point and for a much higher time investment than what can be done outside of those institutions, where there's just less bureaucracy and the organizations are smaller and more adaptable. So I think that, yeah, like ultimately there's a point where people have to be responsible for their own learning. And if you say, well, like, I wish schools taught this, it's like the information is out there. There's a lot of people that are teaching physical therapists how to incorporate strength and conditioning, performance. A lot of people who are teaching business. I think they're doing it in a lot of ways more effectively than what schools teach. I personally think that if anything, formally credentialed programs should be trying to take things away and teach people like what's the minimum for you to practice safely and receive your license. And then a lot of it is just going out on your own. And you also learn a lot just by treating when you're not being mentored and you like have to make some mistakes, albeit mistakes that don't have super high consequences. And I think, Trevor, you want to talk about even like if we're talking about business, how if you taught, and I'll let you elaborate it, but if you taught business to physical therapy students in a clinical program, if they never actually been immersed in a business, no matter what you teach them in a PowerPoint, it's not going to stick.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the actual clinical education in PT school of being a physical therapist. What we learn in musculoskeletal or orthopedics is only as good as what you end up actually doing on your clinical rotation. So tons of kids dominate, orthopedic special testing in your lab setting and, doing really well on written tests. You get thrown in the clinical setting, it's just a completely different world because you're not used to what that actual environment is and applying those skills in a real world setting. And I think the same thing 100% probably applies almost even more so with business. Like, we can learn so much from reading different books and understanding business philosophy and all those kind of big picture things. But when it comes to actually like the X's and O's of running a business day to day, it's like you got to make mistakes. You got to like kind of learn on the fly and be thrown into it to actually adapt and realize what works. And it's the same thing like you're kind of talking about like a clinical setting. It's like when you're on your own and you're practicing and you're making mistakes, that is the 100% best way to learn things. I think the cost potentially is higher when it comes to business, which is why people want that formal education, because it makes us feel like we have a safety net to be able to go out and I'm going to be able to run a business really successfully. But ultimately, it's like you got to make mistakes. Like, I mean, the three of us can attest to that, to the nth degree that like we have made a ton of mistakes to be able to get to where we are. And that's just part of the learning process. Like, I come from a family where my parents have owned a business together my entire life. So I've seen it firsthand what it's like to be an entrepreneur, what it's like to own your own business, what it's like to have employees and all that kind of stuff. And there's so many things to manage. And I always thought I kind of like knew what it would be like, but I didn't. Like, I had a somewhat of a level, probably had a little bit more of a realistic expectation on what it takes and what the process is than most people. But still, it's like, I didn't know what we would have to do day to day. Like, I didn't know what running payroll was. I didn't know what doing the books was. I didn't know what, paying rent and finding a space. And like, there's all these things that go into business that like, yeah, you can, see that this is the kind of, you're going to start an LLC and, you need a lawyer and that kind of stuff. But like, there's so much more to running a business that if they really taught it in a formal academic setting, it would be so watered down because we have so much other stuff to learn that I honestly don't think it would really do you any good.
I agree.
Like you said, it applies. It's the same issue as more clinical education, like more of the actual treatment side of things too. It's like, because we have so much to learn already, everything is almost already watered down. So like adding more in is just going to water down even more of what's already there. And then you're just kind of like polishing a turd with everything. And I love that phrase that I stole from you, Doug. Yeah, the whole, you can learn it in the classroom thing. I was just talking to a patient about it this morning, how it'd be great if, you know, clinical education were more weeks and more time, or there's more opportunity to be in a clinic, you know, whether you're treating or not. Just being there is such a big difference than actually like sitting and seeing what's going on in the classroom. And, you know, a lot of the clinical education stuff, now that everything is like, you know, with the pandemic, everything is all like virtual and remote. I feel like a lot of that stuff can kind of be, you know, I don't want to say it's just like thrown away to the side. Like, you still need to learn the textbook information. And I feel like a lot of it can now be done virtually, where you might be able to save a lot of time for students and then potentially give them more of an opportunity to learn clinically, and maybe kind of combine the two at the same time, where they're almost like doing some stuff part-time in a clinic and then part-time virtually at the same time. I don't know. And I think this is more like your wheelhouse, Doug, with the whole like big picture education side of things. But definitely agree. I would not have been happy having more information thrown at me in PT school, that while already juggling, we had 27 credits one semester.
Yeah,
it's like, it doesn't make any sense to add more. And already at that point in time, like, you kind of have to like figure out what you're going to study for and when you're going to pay attention, because you just can't pay attention for 8 hours a day in classroom and be actually successful.
And we had, I mean, you know, one project in PT school, because we did have like a little bit of like a business education in PT school, but
which I think was appropriate.
Which
it
is
was
appropriate,
like, they
yeah.
need to give you something to just like
Yeah.
expose you to it.
but the project was basically like kind of creating this imaginary business and just saying like what your market would be. Like, you know, I'm going to be a sports PT and I'm only going to work with runners, or, you know, whatever. And it's like, that's a great product for school, but that's not a business education. That doesn't, like, just saying it's like, I found a name, I started a business, this is the population I want to work with, and it's like, this is how much money I want to make. It's like, that's great. That's kind of what starts it, but it's like, yeah, but it's like, there's so much more to it than just that. It's like that, again, it's like, unless you were just in the real world, like you're back against the wall, like you got to make money because you got to feed your family, you got to pay your rent, you got to provide for yourself. It's like, you don't really, it's sink or swim at a certain point when you get in the business world. And it's like, you're never going to be in a sink or swim environment in school. So as much preparation as you could possibly have for an education that they can give you in school, like nothing is going to prepare you like just actually doing it and having a good network of people to be able to be resources for you. And like, I think for us, it's like our accountant, who's also our lawyer, has been like the number one help for us being able to kind of like navigate a bunch of these hurdles that like you just do not see when you start a business.
Yeah, when you're looking for like real estate to find a space like we have in New York City, like there's a million different things that we've never heard of and nobody warns you about.
Right.
And it's just like, you just figure it out on the fly, because like the realtor is not going to help you out. Like, they're just there to kind of to find you a space that works for you, and then, you know, they get their commission, and like they just hope that they find you the right place and you speak highly of them. So it's definitely sink or swim, and you got to figure it out like in the moment for most of this stuff.
Yeah, with any kind of business idea, like there's obviously certain principles that you can apply to make yourself more successful, but you don't know if it's going to succeed until you try. So you could do that project in school where it's like, here's my target demographic, here's my business plan, but until you actually like execute it in the real world with real people, you don't know how it's going to work out. And there have been ideas that like probably we all think were terrible, that like were really successful business wise, and ones that we thought were great ideas that didn't succeed. Like there's just so many variables that play into it. And I think it's very easy to be critical of the formally credentialed programs and the universities. I know that like when I was in school, I was like, how come we're not learning all this stuff? But then you realize that like you can only learn so much at once. And it's not their job to make you a great business person. I think that we would all say that like the number one advice I would give anybody that wants to be successful in physical therapy business initially is to become a good clinician. Because if you don't have a good skill set and you're not like, you can't get results with people. Yes, like if you're business savvy, you can polish the turd a little bit, but you have to have something good to sell first. So I think that's where people should start. And until you have context actually treating people, you're not going to get that much better. Like you can recite all the answers to a test, but until you treat people and get reps, you're only going to go so far. Same thing with running a business. So I'm a lot less critical of schools. I think they work under some really difficult constraints, but I would try to take away from what they do, because ultimately, like, people aren't going to spoon feed you information. Like if you want something, you're going to have to go get it. And in 2021, there's a ton of information out there that's either free or that you can pay for. But I think, especially for some of these niche specific things like business or, performance PT, you can get it at a much lower price point with a lower time opportunity cost, just outside of the formally credentialed programs. And even like on our side, like, yes, we have resources that we think are good, but like I wrote an article about, like if you Google like Brazilian physical therapy, like sports fellowship, it's a bunch of resources, none of which are ours, that probably, in total, maybe between like some of the online courses and books, it's like a couple $100 at the most. If people actually like went through all those things, I think that it would be superior to anything they'd probably get from a university level course. I think that if we're talking about like wanting to learn more about strength and conditioning, if people took, a few weeks during their summer break and just found a good facility and spent 3 to 4 weeks just as a fly on the wall, I think that would be better than what a traditional course could offer, because you're actually like doing the thing you want to do and you're watching it being applied versus learning it in an abstract environment. So learning without context, you're only going to learn so much. You have to immerse yourself in those environments. And remember, like when I was a physical therapy student, I wanted to learn everything at once, but you can only rush that process so much. Like it does take time to do certain things, and trying to squeeze more juice out of that orange when you're in school, I think just makes you learn less of what you really need to learn at that point. It doesn't make you better. You just overstretch yourself.
And you can only talk about this stuff so much. Like, yeah, I have to go in. You can only talk about doing like MMT and range of motion. Like, you actually have to just go do this stuff and do it regularly to actually kind of figure out what you're doing.
Yeah, like your point of being the best clinician, being the best clinician you can before kind of like, to be successful in business, I think is so true. It's like, you got to have a good service, you got to have a good product to sell. And then like that is going to put you above most other people who if the clients you're serving recognize that you do provide a high quality service. It's like, that's how word of mouth spreads. And like, that's the number one reason we got busy, was just being good at what we did. And, we haven't done nothing special for marketing. We've just have been trying to provide as high of a quality service to the people that we work with as we can. It's like, that's what's just helped us. The three of us would not say we are like brilliant business minds whatsoever. I think we're really, really good physical therapists, and we do the best we can with the people who we work with to, help them as much as we can. It's like, and if, you do good things, you help good people, like good stuff's going to happen. And I think that's it's like, that's a very simple business approach, but that's a huge part of business that like you don't see that in action, and you don't see the fruits of that labor until you're really in it yourself.
Yeah. And a lot of like this stuff that we've had to learn to make ourselves competent clinically was from people who either were physical therapists, or a lot of people who aren't physical therapists, who then they're in your professional network, and they're these people that now, if a sprint coach has a physical therapist learning from them, like we've spoken to Derek Hansen a ton, right? We've learned from him. We posted him for a private course. So now he appreciates the respect and the amount of investment we have in what he's teaching. So then that just grows our professional network. That's good for our business too. It's like everything is feeding itself, because now if there's somebody in our area, like Derek Hansen knows who we are, and he's going to say like, oh, I like these resilient guys because they like really appreciate what I like. And I think they could do a good job if they have an athlete who, might be appropriate for what I'm doing, but I'm across the country, so it just won't work out. So that's another thing too, is like to be good clinically is also going to make you a better business person, because you're just going to meet a lot of really, really good people. You're going to meet people who then appreciate what you do and what you value, who are then going to send you more people. And it's all just this, vicious cycle of good stuff happening.
Yeah, and a lot of people will complain about the cost of education, the cost of getting a DPT, but you can't complain about the cost of a DPT and then say you wish that DPT programs covered more stuff, because if DPT programs actually incorporated all the things that people are demanding on social media, business, strength and conditioning, all these like niche specific things, all right, so let's that you would add a year to the curriculum. Now that's an extra year at what, like anywhere between 30 and 50 grand a year. Okay, so now the price of that education is 4 years instead of 3 years at 30 to 50 grand a year. I mean, imagine in a world where you didn't have to get a formal credential, and right now universities are the gatekeeper to that. Imagine even for the price of 1 year, a lower cost program, which is like $30,000, maybe even like $20,000 at a state school. If you said, look, I'm going to just, for $20,000, you can create your own educational experience, it would be amazing. So for that extra year that people are demanding of business education, strength and conditioning, for $30,000, imagine what you could learn if you were in charge of that and you put a little bit of effort into trying to piece things together. So you can, like, that information is out there. You can do it at a much lower price point. And also you can learn at your own pace versus saying like, I have to learn all this stuff in one semester, where you can only retain so much and then you're going to kind of forget it unless you keep revisiting it. So I think we've got to be careful what we wish for. We can't demand lower cost of formal education, but then want more from these programs. I think, again, the goal should be like, I would tell anybody that wants to go to physical therapy school, and some people might not agree with this, but I would say, go to the cheapest place you can go to that's going to get you a license, and then learn what you want on your own. And then beyond that, go to a program that lets you set up your own clinical affiliations, because that's where you're going to learn the most. But I mean, if you said, okay, like you can create your own curriculum where you can learn anatomy on your own, kinesiology, then do some, neuroscience, all these things we learn in school, plus set up your own affiliates. I could do it for a lot cheaper than $100,000 or $200,000. I can guarantee you that. You're paying for that credential, and some of that credentialism is necessary. It's the world we live in. There's regulations and standards, but the more we demand that universities are the gatekeepers and have a monopoly in education, the more we are all going to be in debt. So I think that there's ways to decentralize this stuff if you're self-motivated and able to find things on your own. But if we demand that formal programs are the ones who are teaching this stuff, then it's just going to make it more expensive, and it's going to create more of a barrier for otherwise qualified people to enter the profession.
Boom. Nailed it. If you guys don't have anything else, let's just finish this one.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Resilient Performance Podcast. As a thank you for listening, please use promo code PODCAST for 10% off our professional development resources at resilientperformance.com. Also, make sure to sign up for our mailing list to receive exclusive content and promotions.